Welcome. My name is Denise Griggs. I'm from Sacramento, California, and my presentation is called Hiding in Plain Sight, a trilogy of my family's resistance. The purpose of this presentation is to talk about three female ancestors who, against all odds, dare to be their own advocates, even under physical, emotional, and societal constraints. Two of these women were enslaved, and one was always free, with societal limitations. I will share the environments they lived in during slavery, prior to the Civil War, and after emancipation. You will recognize and understand the influence of these mothers regarding their children for their descendants. Their resilience, fortitude, and limited freedom while oppressed, they dared to hope and believe for a better future. Three of my female ancestors lived approximately the same time between 1820 and 1925. They all ended up in Franklin County, Mississippi. Their names were Amelia Mason Hammonds, America Hunt Harrell, and Chloe Miller Gibson. No doubt they knew of one another as their families eventually intermarried, bringing with them the knowledge of the perseverance of their mother and grandmothers. I'll begin with the one in the middle of the picture, America Hunt Harrell. In this presentation, you will see how her family touched the lives of both Amelia and Chloe. I haven't found a picture of America yet, but her description on the 1865 Registry of Freedmen living on the plantation of Henry Hunt in Franklin County describes her complexion as yellow, no doubt not much difference than Amelia's and Chloe. America Hunt was a mulatto slave born in Kentucky and then relocated to Mississippi. She was owned by Captain Henry Hunt, with whom she bore children. The irony is that she was enslaved in a town named Liberty. Henry Hunt was at one time the sheriff of Amite County, where Liberty is located. Henry was married 4 times, and it has been suggested that America was the half-sister to one of his previous wives. By 1840, Captain Hunt's third pregnant wife divorced him, but America was also pregnant by Henry Hunt at this time. Other than his first wife, America lived on the plantation as the cook for Henry, his wives, and his children. I found other documents and information about Henry Hunt, and from what I can see, he was a very selfish individual. He was born in Georgia, the only son of an Irish immigrant from Tipperary County, Ireland, and he had 6 older sisters. He became a captain during the War of 1812, but he also took a slave with him to attend to his needs. He became the sheriff in 1832 to 33, and he sold and bought slaves. One instance was Henry's son was angry and so drunk he tried to kill his father. Foiled, he was jailed, where the son killed himself. Also, there's a document of an 1825 slave mortgage for a total of $3,153.12. But the beauty of this document is that Henry Hunt has to name the slaves and from whom and where he got them. And on this other advertisement, you can see where he's selling land and slaves right around Liberty and Louisiana. This is an excerpt from the Ebenezer Baptist Church minutes from 1807 and 1907. I include it because the slaves or anybody who moved into a county had 30 days to join the church, or else they would be shunned in the community. Here we have received by experience Joshua, an African belonging to Captain Hunt. And the following month, the reception for members, they received Millie, who I believe was America's mother, an African belonging to Henry Hunt, even though it doesn't state it was her, and who was baptized together with one of the members of the community, and again, Joshua. Although America was the cook and sexual concubine for Captain Hunt, she had influence with him as well as the rest of the slaves. no matter what happened. However, her influence with the other slaves sometimes did not extend to her slave man, Josh the African. There were times when Josh reacted against Captain Hunt's sexual relationship with America, but he couldn't do anything specific about it. The church records from the years 1840 to 1845 state that Josh was put out of the church, brought back in, excluded again, and brought back in again. In 1840, Josh was accused of misconduct and stealing. Amazing, Josh wasn't killed or sold, even though Captain Hunt was never accused of the same things done with America. 5 years later, Josh was restored after America gave birth to Peter in 1844 and Henry Hunt's daughter in 1849. Although America's Children by Captain Hunt had to remain in their place as slaves, I believe America's influence over Captain Hunt was more than marginal and that he had a selfish attraction for her and their children. According to family history, Captain Hunt had Peter and Margaret trained in trades essential for any farm or plantation. Margaret was trained to be a weaver, sewing, weaving, and dyeing fabrics, while Peter became a tanner of animal hides and pelts. Both of their skills were also another source of income for their father and slave master Captain Hunt. After 1856, Captain Hunt relocated his entire family and slaves from Emmett County to Franklin County, Mississippi, and remarried Margaret Cox. Not much longer afterwards, the Civil War began. Once freedom came in 1863, Peter waited approximately a year before joining the U.S. colored troops. And this is his enlistment card. The one striking notice here is that he was 5'10", complexion was mulatto, but they state he was hard to distinguish from a white man. At the same time, his half-brother by Henry Hunt joined the Confederacy. This is an 1865 document, and it reflects that America and her family were still living and working on the property of their former slave master on the Registry of Freedmen living on his plantation. The registry also lists many of my ancestors. Peter was not listed on the register because he was a soldier stationed in Natchez in 1865. His sister Margaret, their mother America, her husband Josh, and their 4 daughters were listed along with their occupations and skin color. Also on this list are my second great-grandparents, Deck and Manda Hunt. America's influence over her family was encouraging. When the law gave African American men the right to vote, even under uncertainty, both Peter and my second great-grandfather, her brother-in-law, Deck Hunt, registered to vote as citizens and free men. Now free to take advantage of another opportunity, in 1874, Peter claimed over 157 acres of land offered by the Homestead Act of May 1862. Peter lived on it and improved it for the years required and was given a homestead patent in 1881. In 1883, America also claimed over 39 acres of land under the Homestead Act. Within 9 years, she lived and farmed half of it and received her land patent in 1892. With help from her family and others, her possessions included a 16 by 16 square foot log cabin, a bed, bureau, chair, and 3 corn cribs. She planted corn and potatoes on half of the acres because the rest of the land was piney woods. At age 70, at the time of her homestead filing, her possessions were 100 bushels of corn, 50 bushels of potatoes, farm utensils, a horse, 5 heads of cows, and 1 yearling, with a total value of $130. Unfortunately, in 1883, America's daughter Margaret died from convulsions at age 33, leaving 3 children behind. So Peter and his wife Emily raised them along with their son Albert. Her children were Abel, Eula, and Abigail. Peter and his wife Emily were married for 25 years until she died in 1907. He tried marrying again 2 more times. One was with a woman who was half his age, but that ended in divorce a year later. His last wife, pictured here, was Rebecca Wilson Gibson, a mulatto woman from Freewoods, Mississippi. She was the widow of one of Chloe Miller Gibson's sons. Neither of these last 2 women had ever been enslaved, and unfortunately, Peter picked up some of his father's habits, so his marriages did not work out according to his penchant. Chloe Miller was a white and Native American woman. She was never enslaved. Her father was John Wiley Miller, who immigrated from England to Virginia to Mississippi, where Chloe's mother Charity died along the way. John Miller intentionally didn't own slaves, instead preferring to hire workers. Doing so caused a rift in the community, so he purchased land in rural Franklin County along with his sons. However, his son and nephew are recorded as owning a few slaves. John's brother Marcus Miller also married a Native American woman. Her name was Mary Gibson. When Marcus died young, Mary had trouble obtaining his land and money for their children, but she never gave up. Her brothers, Native American men, Charles and George Gibson, testified for Mary, and she ended up inheriting the land and money. However, every year she had to account for every penny to the courts. Mary Gibson Miller was also Chloe's sister-in-law, as George, her brother, married Chloe, who was much younger than he. After a couple of children, George suddenly died in 1844. Although she married George, Chloe never changed her name from Miller, nor did she remarry. It's proven that she later had other children. Ironically, one was by her stepson, George Jr. Soon after, a community was established for those who had the same ideals as John Miller. Chloe was considered the matriarch of this community. It was a place where white men cohabitated with African women, Native American women, and other Black and Native American couples. It was called Freewoods, located south of Natchez, Mississippi, in Franklin County, Mississippi. This community specifically guarded against interference from the bonds of slavery because everyone was free to live as they desired, hence the name Freewoods. Few people or families were allowed in without knowing someone there. Besides the Millers and Gibsons, other families included the Haverts, Huffs, and Wilsons. These mixed children often intermarried with Chloe's children and grandchildren. For her family, Chloe established a school, church, and cemetery, and they all helped one another to build homes and work their farms. Although isolated, it was a very well protected community, and they resisted all threats against their families from terrorist groups such as the Klan and individuals looking to rob the Native American burial mounds. Some tried, either they never came out or they never came back. Freewoods is now a defunct town, overgrown with dilapidated shacks and a Native American burial mound. After existing well over 100 years, the school that Chloe established is long gone. The only thing left is the church and the cemetery. Its last burial was this past month with my great aunt, Flora Wilson Miller. She passed her knowledge and pictures to me to continue the memory of Freewoods. I will always be grateful to my great aunt. The descendants of Freewoods are many and live across the United States. One white man who lived in Freewoods was a former Confederate soldier. His mulatto grandson was Jeff Wilson, and he was never enslaved. Jeff left Freewoods and married Lupice Pickett, the granddaughter of America Hunt. Harriet was the half-sister of Peter and Margaret, and her father was Josh, the African former slave of Henry Hunt. Harriet was a midwife who carried a shotgun and her Bible. Whenever the clan came around, she recognized many of them by their voices since she delivered their babies. Her husband Richard made horseshoes for most of them and knew them by the secret insignia he put on their horseshoes. Chloe and America's influence over their families and their descendants continued through Reconstruction, the Jim Crow era, and the ensuing world wars. There isn't much history as to how Amelia Mason arrived in Franklin County, other than the 1870 to 1920 census stating that she was born in Mississippi. However, her death certificate states she was born in Virginia. In 1869, she married Leighton Hammond. On the 1870 census, Amelia is living with Leighton in the Ross family household, but there isn't any indication of their relationship. When Amelia married Leighton, she already had 3 children, Amanda, Ferdinand, and Mina. By 1880, she and Leighton had 4 more children, 1 son and 3 girls. If you'll notice, by 1910, they owned their own home and it was free and cleared. Amelia and Leighton became prosperous even in a turbulent time in America. With little education, they worked and thrived together. They homesteaded land, farmed, and their sons learned to process molasses, became blacksmiths as well as farmers. These valuable attributes were passed on to Amelia and Leighton's children and grandchildren. After the death of Leighton in 1914, Amelia filed as a widow for Leighton's pension, which she received until she died in 1925. Several of the surrounding neighbors became interrelated with the Mason and Hammond's family through marriage, such as with the Starks, Normans, and Hunts. On Amelia and Leighton's death certificates, their parents' names are unknown. In Leighton's pension files, he states that he never knew who his parents were as he was moved from a couple of plantations right after his birth. However, he is described as mulatto with blue eyes. America, Chloe, and Amelia all had great impacts on the lives of their children, but their legacies were almost forgotten. This presentation allows me the opportunity to tell their stories not only to the community, but also to their descendants, some who never knew about their ancestors' heroic lives. These women are excellent examples who did whatever was necessary to keep their families alive and to become successful men and women. Because of my ancestors, I am extremely proud of our heritage. 2, I am resolved to dare to be myself and be my own advocate, even when under physical, emotional, or society's constraints. It will never be the type of constraints our ancestors endured, but through them and the faith it took for them to survive, I am well able, by faith and example, to live, thrive, and survive the life that was forged for me in history. Again, my name is Denise Griggs, and I'm from Sacramento, California.